Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Yoong. I am Ethan's operating partner. And today, Irina and I will have a fireside chat followed by a Q&A on the topic, how to influence without authority. For background, Irina is an engineering leader and leadership coach. She was a tech lead manager at Google and a staff software engineer at Uber. Irina is also the author of the Caring Techie newsletter, a LinkedIn top voice, congratulations, and teaches a live online course on the same topic on Maven. So for the audience in the room, to ask questions, we're going to use two methods. The first one is you could either raise your virtual Zoom hand room during the Q&A session at the end, or feel free to write your Q&A in the Slido feature you'll see the app link in the Zoom chat. But without further ado, let's get started. Okay, Irina, let's kick it off with non-executive key stakeholders. The first question is, how do you go about quickly identifying the incentive structure for your cross-functional teams?
Sure, great question. The incentive structures for cross-functional teams usually doesn't differ that much from function to function. And we have to start with the premise that everybody wants to get their job done. Their job. It's emphasis on their job, right? So I would start by getting curious of, who is on the team? What are the roles and the functions that we are dealing with? And then try to map the function to the incentives that come with that role, right? And then, being empathetic, like what pressures might they be under? I've had the experience where the product counterparts and the product org was under different pressures than the engineering org. So there was clearly lack of alignment there. But once I understood where, certain motivations were coming from, which was the top, it built this empathy and it helped me understand better why they're, insisting on certain things. The other thing is we have to think about what might be their personal goals. Same with the incentives of the function. People might have their own goals of getting promoted or some personal projects that they really want to, get out the door. So there might be a personal incentive there. And then lastly, we can just ask. We can just ask, we to identify the structures, we can assume and we can do, guesswork, but we can also ask, like, what are you trying to achieve? What are your OKRs? How can I help you achieve your goals while I also achieve mine? Right? So
When
there's
you
not a one size fits all.
on the figuring out the professional and the personal goals, are there
Mhm.
specific questions or phrases that you have in your toolkit, or is it just simply saying, "What are your goals? Here are mine."
So here's the thing about this type of question is people might not be incentivized to tell you right away if they don't trust you, right? So
Hmm.
trust is and that's why, with this whole influence course and everything, I keep saying build relationships. Relationships matter. Relationships are the foundation. And relationships mean essentially trust. Because building superficial relationships can only take you so far. But if you really want to get to truth and people to share and feel comfortable, you need to build trust. So they'll feel like, oh, there's no, because with sharing these types of things, people might think, oh, is there an ulterior motive? Like, are
Hmm.
you trying to help me or sabotage my goals? Like, I don't know. So I'm not going to share. And that's actually a common mistake that managers also make when they when they get a new report. They all of a sudden just ask, what are your goals? And the person doesn't know what to answer. Like, should I say what you expect me to say, or should I be honest? I don't know. Right. So
Hmm.
trust is a big one.
I'm glad
But
you brought up relationship and trust. We'll dive deep into that. I think you had another train of thought. Go ahead and finish that.
uh, in terms of how to ask, what are your personal goals? One approach is, where do you see your, career going, or where do you see this project going, or, there are some other alternatives is, what are your goals for the project, or, um, Are you excited about your trajectory here? Like there are ways to probe what their goals are in ways that use open questions. And they'll feel more, invited to disclose as much as they feel comfortable. But
On
also, how can I help you? How
yeah,
can I support you? That's such an underutilized question.
Ethan and I talk about that one a lot. Um, it's adding value to them first before making your ask. On the topic of professional goals, what do you do in the instance where an important partner team does not share the same incentives as you and thus has a resistant collaboration, is off-putting that? How do you go around that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because I've experienced this from both a manager role and as a tech lead role and as a pure IC role. And the leverage is kind of different. And I might, as an IC, try to, be the diplomatic representative of the team and sort of bridge that gap. But at the end of the day, I feel like this is the manager's job to sort of set their teams up for success by aligning these incentives. And now, okay, how would a manager do this? What people must not forget is that a successful team is a group of many hands and one mind. And we're all working for the same success of the company at the end of the day, right? And once we align on why this is important, like this is the intent, we have to express intent, we can get into the details of how do we make this interaction more seamless. Because usually the friction and resistance comes from a reason. They might not have time or, there are different friction. And how can we minimize the friction? Right. But I do believe that the manager should be the diplomatic representative of that team and work with the other team, the partner teams, to get this started. The other thing is I've seen issues with teams being resistant because they just didn't have a proper kickoff. Right. And this kickoff is supposed to just get to know the team, get to know why we're doing this. And how you ask something matters a lot, probably matters more than what you ask. Right? If you just go to a team and say, hey, do this for me, I'd be like, no, I don't have time. Goodbye. Right? But if you have a kickoff and you explain, okay, now we're collaborating, guys, just make yourselves available for this, then it's a different story.
I like your emphasis on the importance of a good kickoff. Also tying it back to the company level objectives
Yes.
and then escalating quickly to the managers or skips when needed to be a tiebreaker, let's say.
Otherwise, it's just a waste of time. I mean, it's just inefficient, right?
Yeah. I like that. Tie it back to, I mean, no one likes inefficiency. I feel like if you bring it up in a meeting, let's stop being inefficient here. It's very hard to disagree with that. So
Yeah.
that could be another good phrase.
Yeah. Totally.
This came up quite a bit. And here was the phrasing. There's a lot of different types of meetings with stakeholders, one-on-one, small group, large, async document feedback, check-ins, etc. If you're the one leading the collaboration, from your experience, is there a certain flow or type of meeting you like to use that you found more effective in certain scenarios? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I've actually led numerous cross-organization, cross-offices projects, and none of them looked exactly the same in terms of how we organized and how we got on the same page. I think it's very important to figure out, to express intent to save people's time. Again, as you said, it's very hard to disagree with that and find the most efficient way that works for everybody. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect, but it is important to assess preferences and availability first and sort of make people part of solving this, problem rather than dictating, here's how we're going to do it. And then it's very, very important to clearly define each interaction. What are we trying to achieve here? Like, are we trying to make a decision? Is this a brainstorming purpose? Are we just sending status updates, right? And then just leverage the strengths of each format, one-on-ones. And obviously, because if you just bring everybody in the same room for each interaction, that's expensive, and it's unnecessary. And you're not going to have everybody's attention anyway. So one-on-ones are better for personalized feedback or sensitive issues or mentoring. Smaller group meetings are for related tasks and objectives. If they're unrelated, then people might not need to be in the room, right? And then only reserve large meetings for, kickoffs or when the input from a broader group is necessary. And then for everything else, just do asynchronous as much as you can. Documents, Bloom videos, all these things where just people can contribute at their own pace. And then, check in. I was at one point just using newsletters. I was just setting updates newsletters for a team that was cross-works, for a project that was cross-works. And that seemed to be working fine because people didn't need to have that information in their heads. They just needed to know where to access to find it if they needed it. So I did the work for that. And it just saved everyone's time. It's the type of glue work that I talk about a lot.
I like that term, the glue work. And I've heard from many different seniority levels that an internal newsletter is effective because you control the message, and it's a very simple way for people to disseminate and share that with other teams, tying it all back to you as the source. Here's a hotly debated topic I read a lot online and on LinkedIn. Where do you stand on this? Pre-read documents, sending it beforehand, or quiet reading first 10, 15 minutes of the meeting?
Here's the thing. I would say pre-read, but the problem is nobody reads them.
Exactly.
So I guess I'm leaning towards reading in the meeting. That rhymes. But yeah, that's the thing. I mean, even the most, well-intentioned people still, this doesn't happen.
Yep.
And then the other thing is reading in the meeting / I'll just walk you through what you need to know right now, or giving them the context and simplifying the reading for them. That's another option.
Interesting.
And I mean, those things can be added to the agenda as well. So maybe do both. But it's unavoidable that you can't guarantee that everybody will read it. So
yeah, I'm in the group of read in the meeting, because relying on pre-reads or pre-reads is relying on good intentions, and that doesn't work. Okay, I'm gonna shift to senior executives. We got a lot of questions on this one. How do you go about disagreeing with a senior executive, especially one who is very strongly opinionated and is vocal about it?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Let's start with some principles. Just because they're senior executive doesn't mean you always have to say yes. I want to invite people to think about disagreeing or saying no to things as part of their jobs. So, like their duty. It's their duty to express concerns. It's their duty to express dissent if that's their job, right? And if they don't, they're not doing their jobs. So what that is important is because it takes you away from the disagreement. Which helps, because then you won't take things personally. I think that's the number one rule. We must not take anything personally in any disagreements. Second principle is there's no time for bullshit with senior executives. Like time is of utmost importance, so be prepared. And then keep your values and show respect, but stay in integrity. Now, how do we prepare? There's multiple kind of checklists that I think about. Is finding the right time is important, because people are not, and we talk about this in the course as well, about moments of influence, and people are not always open, receptive to your disagreement. And with difficult senior execs, they might never be, but you can still optimize for certain micro moments, right? And there are moments where people are more receptive than others. And then the second thing is, do I need buy-in from other people first? I think with senior execs, they tend to defer expertise. Like, have you asked this person, or what does this person say? Their trusted circle. right? So that would definitely help your case. Make sure you're right. Like, gather your data, evidence, impact, quantifiable, and do your homework. Especially with the senior execs, they're not going to go for wishy-washiness. And you're going to be more respected if you are prepared. Consider discussing the issue in private. That's another thing that people forget. Some of the things might not need a big group, and that actually helps the other person feel less threatened. And then how to disagree. It's like a whole topic, but you can disagree without saying I disagree. And some ways to do this is asking, may I offer a different perspective? Or I have reasons to believe that this won't work. Would it be okay to explain my reasoning? How can you say no to that, right? Like, sure, go ahead. Or have we considered this other point of view? Like, you're not saying you disagree, you're just redirecting attention, right? And so that all helps. And the other thing that I am a little sensitive to this as well is I really don't like it when people use dismissive words or judgmental words, or so things like should or bad, good. Clearly, this is like this. I'm like, clearly to whom, right? Or generalizations that always in the nevers. I'm like, oh, show me that. Don't be generic just to, seem more persuasive, because I'm not buying it, right? Or dismissive. That's the other thing that triggering personally for me is when people say this shouldn't be a problem. I'm like, I just told you I'm concerned about it. Like, you're not making me feel heard, right? So if you end up doing that, you're kind of on the wrong side of that person. So that's you don't want that.
From many of the effective executives that I've seen, they use the phrase, have we considered blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I've seen that repeated many times. It's a key phrase that I've saved in my swipe files. I like your point on deferring expertise, because then that tells you who to pinpoint and align with before the meeting. Because if you go in with those experts and you have allies and they +1 support you, it makes it more difficult to disagree with you. I want to double click on one piece, the micro moments, especially when it comes to senior executives, that let's say the situation is there's a senior executive you don't interact with that often. How do you find out what are the effective micro moments for that individual?
I mean, so context matters. So if it's in a meeting where there's already been like very stressful, difficult things talked about, that's not really the best moment if people are overwhelmed or stressed. Some good moments are when people are already considering some changes, some other changes, like you can sort of package them in because they're in a receptive state. Other moments are tying it to external context, like for example, with AI, right? If there's a piece of news that something happened with that other companies have adopted a piece of technology, that might be a good piggybacking. And that's a good moment of influence when you piggyback on something external. Also, I think it depends a lot on each person. So one thing that people forget is you can also get more intel from other people. Like, how do you deal with this person? Or what, is there anything that I shouldn't say? Or when do you think it's the best time to pitch this idea from people who know that person better?
That's a good
those
point.
are some other moments. Also, I want to mention in terms of context. So context matters, and that's why credibility is very important. So if the senior executive doesn't know you, it's important for you to establish credibility and who you are. But also, in general, just having a strong personal brand within the company matters. Because, again, the person might not know you, but someone who knows the senior executive might have heard of you, right? You have a reputation of being, knowledgeable and reliable. So those are things that help.
We talked about owning an internal newsletter as one way to build a
Mhm.
reputation. Are there other methods or tactics you've seen people do well to build a strong reputation internally?
Uh, yes. So this is a whole module in the course because personal branding is just such a misunderstood concept. Everybody thinks, oh, personal branding equals LinkedIn
Mm,
or conferences, and it's not. It's about crafting intentionally how you want people to perceive you and the story you want people to say about you. Like if you ask three random people in your organization to say three things about you, you kind of want them to say the same things. Like that's the things that you want to be associated with. So in terms of personal branding, and if you think about marketing in general, the way to create a personal brand is by having a content strategy. So content strategy means how do you showcase all the qualities you want to be remembered for? And that can be, there's so many opportunities internally as an employee to do all these things, from sharing knowledge to sending newsletter, all the communication essentially you're sending out.
mm.
So that's broadly how.
One piece that Ethan shares when sending communication or updates is it's better to send frequent updates than one big one at the end of the month or end of the quarter, which some
Yeah.
people do. They think, let me wait until all the results are in, and then this quarter, I'm going to send one big update. Frequent, there's a reason why in marketing, people aim for at least a 7x.
Seven.
Yeah,
Yeah.
message frequency, right? Because it takes that much to recall.
Yeah.
Um, on the topic of senior executives, this one I'm curious about. We talked about disagreeing with senior executives, and we talked about not always saying yes. Is there a difference on how do you say no to a senior executive request?
Yeah. So same principles from disagreements apply. And also this is where business acumen matters a lot, and being able to talk numbers. Like you might come up with a suggestion and people will be like, sure, nice. But then when you say, hey, we need to replace this database because it would save us this much money, it's a different conversation. So we can't do this because this is the financial impact is very important to be able to connect the dots between what you're saying no to and business goals. Second, again, like similar to how saying I disagree, there are ways to say no without saying no. And some examples for that are you can decline, but you can counteroffer.
Mm.
Or you can position it as a trade-off. If we do this, then we don't do this other thing. Or you can get more time. You can ask
I
for, I need more, before I say yes or no, I need whatever, time, data, and so on.
I love the counter offer because it's one thing to simply say no, and it's another to say no, here's another solution.
Yeah.
And if anyone watches the show Suits about the law firm, you'll always find that the top lawyers always have a counter offer with their clients. They say no a lot, but they always offer a better solution. So it's one takeaway I have from that.
Yeah.
Anything else on this topic?
I think that's pretty much it. Just be prepared. And obviously, there's no way to, especially if the person is very difficult to work with, there's no way to guarantee whether they will get triggered or not. And there are ways to handle that if that happens.
Let's go into one of those. Let's say you trigger a negative response from a senior executive. What do you do?
Yeah, well, you have to sort of de-escalate. That's the primary thing. Because here's the thing, and that's the one thing that we forget is empathy, right? So if we try to imagine what might be causing this reaction, right? So when it can be one of the more like we can be one of the following. They maybe have a clear agenda and you're in the way. So you're, in their perception, you're trying to deviate from whatever their mind is set on. Or they feel like they need to prove something and you're, again, getting in the way and you're a threat, or they really don't like to waste time, or they're just insecure about something that you don't know what it is about, right? So when they do get triggered, or they get into the like negative Nancy, my way or the highway type of mindset, is first, don't take it personally, and don't let yourself getting steamrolled into defense. I think that's very important, and keep the conversation going. If they shut off and you shut off, that's not going to take you anywhere. But if it does, you can also suggest reassessing at a later time, when people can calm down. And the other thing is, it's a technique, but and this is if you expect resistance from the get-go. There is a little hack that I actually learned from Chris Voss. I don't know if you guys know Chris Voss, the author of Never Split the Difference. He has this term called the accusation audit that is literally disarming people. So you go into a room and you literally like list all the accusations that the other person might think about you for scheduling the meeting. And I've actually used this successfully numerous times, and it works because what it does is it disarms. And then once they're disarmed, like, okay, I need to listen to you now because I don't have all these layers in between. So highly recommend Never Split the Difference. And then, when someone's really triggered, what works is, again, empathy and listening and asking questions and addressing their concerns, because they feel triggered because they're not feeling heard. And sure, is the reaction disproportionate to the conflict? Maybe, but it's not our place to judge that. It's our place to help them calm down. So addressing concerns, the worst thing you can do is just make them feel dismissed even more and unheard, because people will just get louder. That's just human tendency.
I like your point about disarming, and it reminded me of a few startups that I know. When they're going through an acquisition, one of the slides that they highlight up front is all the reasons not to acquire us. And it sets the tone. It sets two things. It sets that you can trust us because we're giving you all of our negative noises out of the way. And then it gives them a list of, and you basically counter each one of those. Yes, you might think this, but here's the actual truth, or here's how we perceive it. So it reminded me of that.
Yeah.
Let's go into, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say it works.
It works, exactly. And it's a good exercise for you too, because sooner or later with a good partner or an acquirer, you're going to get those questions.
Yeah.
So it's like creating the FAQs up front.
Yeah, and anticipating the questions.
Exactly.
Which shows empathy again. Like, you put yourself in their shoes and try to anticipate the concerns.
You talked about relationship building. So this is a big topic. You have a very popular newsletter article about influential people don't network. They build social capital. Can you tell us more about social capital?
Yeah, so the way I think about social capital is having like a bank account for each person. And with every interaction, you get an opportunity to make a deposit into this account. And the deposits can be small, like a hello, an acknowledgement, like, hi, I see you, hello, checking in, very basic. So that's a small deposit, to a very big one where you're providing support or helping them do something that they want. So the more meaningful the interaction, the more the deposit is worth. So what this allows you to do is essentially creates that deposit, that goodwill, so that whenever you need anything, and again, the purpose isn't to, create this transactional model, because that's too late. If you need something and then you start building social capital, it's too late. So this needs to be a habit if you want this to work. And what are you going to end up with? A strong network. And as you mentioned, providing value first. This is what it means. These deposits is providing value first. So ways to do that. it doesn't, and that's the other misunderstanding, that to build social capital, you don't have to always do these huge grand gestures. Sometimes things as little as making people feel heard and seen are good enough. It's actually such a gift when you feel like understood, because that's what making people feel heard and seen means. It means making, like, I matter. Making people feel like they matter and their needs are valid and what their concerns are valid. That's actually building social capital. And it's such an easy way to just be there, hold space for a person and just listen, right? And then sure, helping out, asking people, hey, there are two things, right? Anticipating needs. So things like, I noticed you might need this. So would you like me to do it for you? Again, it's like, it's showing that you are able to pay attention to them. It's making feel like they matter, and that's how you build the social capital. The other option is to ask them, hey, again, how can I support you? What can I do for you? Right? And then also teaching people things or offering to be a sounding board, just making yourself available, putting your time, offering it to them. It's a gift, right? So those are a few ways to build social capital that people don't really realize that it doesn't take that much. It really doesn't.
I've seen people use open office hours every 2 weeks,
Yes.
every month as an effective way.
Mm-hmm.
And on the topic of social capital and providing feedback, it ties back into what you said earlier. Your personal brand is a content strategy internally.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you think about what's an effective content strategy, you think about this newsletter, right? Because if you have distribution, otherwise known as large people reading or the right executives reading your newsletter, then that could be a mechanism for you to help other people and help them be seen. Maybe highlighting them, thanking them in that email, right? Small gesture, but it can send waves because it's an artifact that they can then use to, promo docs or whatever in the future.
Absolutely. And one thing here that's, again, very underrated, but such a powerful social capital tool. Whenever there's a launch, you can send out an announcement. We launched this. Here's the credits. Credits go to. That's such an opportunity to build social capital. And it takes nothing. It's like you're not giving anybody promotions. You're just thanking them. And you can add advisors. Like even if people weren't necessarily the people who implemented something or were very hands-on, just, put their opinions and gave some feedback. And you can add them to the list. I always loved when it just made me want to help more, right? Whenever my name was on these types of lists. So, I'm always appreciative of that.
I love that tip on adding an advisor section because you always have an advisor or you always got someone's pair of eyes on it, etc.
Yeah.
And the great thing about these launch celebratory emails is the leaders of those teams usually reply +1 or great job.
Yeah.
And sometimes it steamrolls into it's a domino effect. So it's a good tool. We've talked a lot about listening. And a very popular phrase I'm sure everyone's heard is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so use them in that ratio. And you would think listening is an easy skill to develop, but we still get a lot of questions. How do I become a better listener? Do you have any tips on how to do that?
Yeah, so actually we do this exercise in my course because it seems like a basic thing, but it's not. So we do like a speaker listener exercise. So the idea is that when we listen, oftentimes, without realizing, a part of our brain is going into, oh, this person said this means this, then this means like I'm going to say this back. So we're listening, but part of our brains is preparing a response. And what we want to do instead is just purely listening with the purpose of capturing everything that we hear and reflecting it back, like saying it back, paraphrasing it back. And so we don't have time to think of a response, but that's the goal of listening is to understand, not to respond. And sure, it might take us a bit of time to come up with a response. It slows us down a little bit, but it creates this bridge of understanding if we're able to reflect back to what we heard. And ways to reflect back are, it sounds like your challenge is ... So, or from what I'm hearing, ... You know, what your challenge is or what you're saying is, if I understand this correctly, you just reflect it back. And the two options that you have here are, they're going to say yes, exactly. If they say yes, exactly, not game over, but good job. Like this is where you want people to get. This is an understanding. But if you haven't, and that often is the case, we never get it right the first time, they will say either yes and, or no and this instead. So they will clarify even more for you. You know, so that's what listening really means. If we're not able to, and this is, many people are not able to actually reflect correctly. And so you have to just go through this, like the motions again and try again, just try again. And there are people who also add their own judgments to what they hear. So the idea is to not add anything from you, just paraphrase and keep it as pure as and as close to what the source basically said.
I like the seek first to understand mental model and keeping that in the back of your mind. And the phrase, if I'm understanding correctly, ... is a power move. Because as you said, you're either going to get yes, or they're going to clarify more, which helps everyone in the room. And is usually the question everyone in the room had to begin with. So you're going to be seen as the person who stood up and asked that question. I've seen that used very effectively by...
That happened to me, and actually it helped me build connections with people just because I was able to articulate what was on their minds. And they felt seen by me. Although I didn't try to do it on purpose. I just was genuinely confused.
There you go. We had this question, and I'm curious if you have additional thoughts on it. And if not, we can move on. How do you become someone who people want to advocate for when you are not in the room? Everyone wants that position. Any advice on how you could do that?
I would say social capital is the biggest one. Being nice to people. And this goes back to, you know, the question about incentives and how you ask for it. How many times have you done things for people just because you wouldn't get nothing, you don't get anything out of it, but you really just want to help someone because you like them, right? And so that's the thing about asking and aligning incentives. Like, sure, exchange of rewards and people getting, you know, things out of helping each other is one way, but sometimes people just do it because they want it, right? So let's not forget that that's what you get when you are actually this, like, you build enough social capital and you have a strong personal brand where people see you as deserving of these personal appeals of, you know, hey, can I ask for a favor, right? We just want to help them because they're nice. They've helped us. It's like, sure, we want them to succeed. They deserve to succeed, right? So that's where we can get if we invest time into building these relationships.
That makes sense. Before we move into audience Q&A, both text and live, do you have any other favorite framework or playbook that we haven't covered?
For influencing without authority. So in the course, I actually have my own framework that's heavily reliant on relationships, but there's a few steps before. So, and it's a 4-step framework. Number one is the mindset. There are stories we tell ourselves about how we deserve or not to be heard that we need to process because it might hold us back from influence. Things like, I'm an introvert, or I'm not a native speaker, I don't have enough seniority. There's all these mindset things that we can work on in terms of how we show up with confidence or not. Then there's the personal branding layer. Then there are relationships. And then the cherry on top, which is the biggest misconception about influence. People think that's influence, the cherry on top, when you actually go and make an ask, or I call that acts of influence or persuasion, if you want. But that needs to sit on top of everything else. Otherwise, it is not influence. And those two terms, influence, persuasions, are quite easy to confuse. But yeah, and in terms of when we think about influence, the things we need to think about are commitment, compliance, and resistance. So commitment is we get this wholehearted buy-in from people. Compliance is people just saying yes, and resistance is people just saying straight up no. So what we want to think about is how do we maximize commitment? Not, I mean, compliance is nice, but what we want is people to want to do those things, right?
Got it. Okay. Let's move on to Q&A. If you want to ask your question live, raise your virtual hand. I'll call on you. In the meantime, I'm going to go through the text submitted ones. Let's see. I'll do Sabrina's first in the text submitted. Irina, how do you effectively communicate with executives in a startup setting? Anything different?
I think in a startup setting is actually easier because you're not a stranger anymore, and it's easier to find time. They know who you are. You don't have to build that credibility. It depends also on obviously on the size of the startup, but I find it easier. What's not easy is that the same, whether it's a startup or not, the same sort of difficulties with senior execs can happen in a startup too. And there's a lot of ego that can interfere. And I've actually one time gave feedback to the co-founder, a piece of feedback that she straight up rejected. And I was like, okay. But then guess what? She apologized later. So I stayed in my integrity to say those things. It's not easy. But yeah, still same principles apply, you know, integrity, saying what you have to say, how you say it as well. That's about it. I didn't
Coming
find
prepared
that
with
many differences.
data and business goals.
Yeah, totally.
Sabrina asked this question. Sabrina, I also see your hand is up. Do you have anything to add on it? Go for it.
So based on my personal experience, I actually find communication with executives at startups a lot more difficult than larger companies. And this is why I think I struggle with it. There's a couple of reasons for it. So I've been at two startups. One, I was like a junior partner, another one recently at Even Up, and actually I'll be joining another startup later, a different one later this month. There's a couple of reasons. Like number one, the co-founders have various level of experience. Like unlike big companies, like when you get executives, they're often very, very seasoned. The co-founder can be in their like early 30s. There's maybe their first big gig. It's very different. They're less experienced as executives. Number two, like the power disparity between an employee and a co-founder is so huge in a startup, because even say when you work for, you know, a corporation as large as Amazon, even if your own skip level manager is like a level 8 or whatever, a director, which is a big deal in Amazon, there's still other level 8s. There are many different other level 8s, and they can all contribute. And sometimes you can find a more favorable opinion. But like, you know, if you're in a startup and, you know, you report to the chief product officer or whoever, that person ultimately just has so much say and power. And number three, the amount of uncertainty and ambiguity around, especially product and pushing out new product in a startup, is just so much greater. You have less data, you have less resources, you have less time. So this is why I raised that question.
Sabrina,
Yeah,
Irina, before you go into it, Sabrina, what stage startup are you talking about?
So Even Up, when I joined, is a Series A startup, and during my tenure there, it became a stage like a Series B.
Okay.
The new startup I'm joining will be a Series B by the time I join. Well,
Okay,
they're already
got it.
Series B.
Okay.
Yeah, so I want to acknowledge all the differences you point out. That's reality. You know, you see people who maybe they have been for 5 years in the industry and now they're CEOs, right? However, and one thing to keep in mind is you cannot control how people react, right? So in terms of strategy and how you approach disagreements and all these things, nothing really changes because you are operating from a place of integrity and fairness and understanding that people can have different reactions to it. But at the end of the day, you can't coerce anybody into just doing anything. And there's no magic formula. I'm sorry to say this. You know, is it more difficult? Absolutely. Is it more, not even difficult, I would say maybe more unpredictable? Yes. I think one thing that's common is, you know, try to not trigger these people once you understand their triggers, what not to do. But in terms of should you say things? Yes, I think you should say things. Again, that's your job, to escalate concerns. You know, maybe if things get really bad, maybe it's not a good fit. You know, maybe it becomes like a toxic dynamic, and you have to keep that in mind. But personally, I don't think that changes the approach much just because you're in a startup. And that's my experience based on both big tech and startups. Working with people with really high ego and high uncertainty, and de-escalation becomes even more important because, you know, in terms of uncertainty, people behave very differently in good times versus stressful times. And that's much more apparent in startups. Like you can sense, and they might be erratic. Yes, executives are erratic executives. I've seen that, you know, so de-escalation, reassuring matters, but you still have to say what you have to say.
Plus one to Irina said, and I'll say, when you do disagree, bring the data and also bring the voice of the customer. Especially at early stage startups, the voice of the customer is very powerful. The other thing at early stage startups, when you are led by the founder/CEO, you do have to be aware that they have that founder/CEO power. Where in the end, if they want to say, this is my company and we're doing it this way, that is their choice, right? So it goes back to, do you believe in this founder/CEO? And ultimately at that stage, they are the head of product. They are the technical lead. They may also be the sales lead, etc. So always keep that in mind, because as Irina said, you are dealing with egos. Let's go with Jonathan next.
I appreciate it. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
I'll ask my question that I put in the chat. What do people get wrong most often about influencing without authority?
Ooh, love this question. Let's see. First of all, they try to do it without building credibility. So, or having credibility, or without earning their right to influence. So if someone comes to me and they say, you should ... I'm like, who are you to tell me? Why should I listen to you? Right? So anticipating that, and that's, you either, you know, bring your credibility up front and say who you are and why you're saying those things, right? Or building a prior relationship and like getting to know that ahead of time before you actually try to influence, right? What else? People focus a lot on persuasion techniques. Like, how do you phrase something to be more influential? It's not like that. Humans are irrational, and humans have, like, even if you say use the most, you know, the best arguments, even when it's for their own good, people might not listen, right? So I've seen that all the time. You have to see the human in front of you for what they are. A human that's imperfect, they might not always be rational, and not get frustrated if they are not willing to, you know, be receptive. The other thing is, I think people give up too soon. So sometimes it's about when you try to influence and you think you don't succeed, you've just planted the seed. Sometimes you have to go and water the seed again and again, and then it works. And that's very rooted in human psychology, because the psychology change model with pre-contemplation, contemplation, like it takes time for people to get into action. And you can't make it faster or slower for people, but it doesn't mean you're doing anything right. It just means you have to keep going, right? I would say those are the biggest ones I've seen. Why should I listen to you? That's the big one.
Jonathan, anything else? Okay.
No, great answer. Thank you.
Irina, I love the plant the seed because it does take time. And it ties back to something you said earlier, which is, can you figure out a way to bundle in your idea with something else that's going to be part of a change? And if you could keep doing that in small increments, eventually you'll probably get the whole thing approved, you know, your proposal,
Yeah.
etc.
Totally. And I would also, I want to add one more thing. Another mistake people make is they try to influence, but they try to influence by saying, this is bad. But it's an incomplete goal. It should be, this is bad and this is good. How about this? You know, just pointing out what's bad isn't enough. Should you come with the full solution? No, but you need to also reorient towards finding the solution. What can we do to do this better? And then involving other people. Consultation is one of the most effective persuasion techniques that we talk about in the course. Just getting people to have a stake in what you're trying to influence. Right? And that's a powerful leadership way, even though, again, leaders have authority, leaders have the power, right? But if they want to get buy-in from and wholehearted like commitment from their people, they should still use influence, not their power, just not like, you know, that's the most, again, if we're maximizing for commitment, not compliance, that's the approach we have to take, where we try to find it together and everybody has a stake and everybody's motivated.
That makes sense. Good, Ty. Alex, go for it.
Thanks, Irina. So I love when you talked about giving people credit in like the newsletters and stuff like that. I've had a lot of good success with that as well. How do you balance thanking generic groups or teams versus individuals, particularly for bigger projects?
I say individuals is better. But you know, try to be like genuine. Like, did they actually contribute or not? Because then it loses its power. If people's perception of that is just fluff, right? So try to keep it authentic and name people. Because like they will, even if you think about it in terms of coworkers, right? They'll see their coworker getting a kudos or credit, then they can, you know, that they can mention that in their promo packet. Then teammate is going to be like, huh, I want to be on those emails. Like, I want to do that thing. How did you do it? I want, you know, it'll just motivate people more. You know, so stick to the actual people who contributed, who did something. Don't just add generic people.
What about when there's differing levels of contribution? Like, is it name everybody, or is there kind of a arbitrary cutoff of, sorry, I'm not naming you by name if you didn't do this much?
I would say err on the side of generosity.
Okay.
But you don't need to go into that many layers. It's more like who was hands-on, who was just sort of theoretical, conceptual participant, right? Versus hands-on. And err on the side of generosity.
Alex, that's where the advisor section can come in as well.
Yeah.
Because if it's pretty apparent to the reader that the advisor section is quite large, but there's a small section of people of high contributors, I think they'll get the picture.
Yeah.
No one's going to put in their promo doc, Alex put me as an advisor, and thus I need to get promoted.
Cool. Thank you very much.
If you want to ask a question live, raise your Zoom virtual hand. I'm going to go with a few in the Q&A. Let's see. How do you influence an entire org, Irina? Do you start at the top or do you start at the bottom?
Yeah, great question. So in the course, we discuss a tool called the Power Map, where we find out what the best people are to influence. And sometimes it might be the top, but sometimes you might not have access to the top. And so it's just a tool that helps you find the right people to influence or to get to know. And in the building relationships module, we also talk about how to take a relationship from strangers to where, I mean, it's the different phases of a relationship, but to, okay, we're good. We have this solid relationship, right? But yeah, the answer is it depends. And it depends also on the project you have. Depending on the project, one person might be more influential than others. So to come up with a proper strategy, you kind of have to get a sense of the lay of the land, who's who, what type of power they have. And we talk about in the course about the 5 types of power, whether it's positional or personal. And then try to understand their incentives and their goals. And then you figure it out. essentially. But yeah, it's a tool we use.
Daniel, you have your hand raised. Do you have a follow-up on this?
Yeah, just to follow up, if part of your organization, like the top leader organization, like an executives or so, they're very busy people, right? So do you ever have an informal chat first to see where they stand, or do you wait until you're really ready and have their support? It's like, how much do you wait to meet with them to make sure you're aligned with what they expect versus that you're ready to answer all their questions?
Yeah, great question. I personally don't like to surprise people, to take people by surprise. And I don't like to create this suspense. Like the more early feedback I can get, the more I can get people to participate in whatever initiative I have, the better. And then depending on like how high this executive is above you, you have layers above you. Hopefully you have meetings with your skip level. You've gathered this feedback early on and the support before you present it to a big executive. But even so, giving context, it shows thoughtfulness, because nobody wants to be put in the spot to make a decision. People want to think about it. This is just human. So I would say try not to do big reveals, but more be thoughtful and try to get early feedback. That's very, very important, including from the executives, because they will have opinions. And if you don't take their feedback into consideration early on, you're missing out.
I agree.
Then getting early feedback, it'll also make it seem like it's their idea too. You're sharing participation. So yeah.
Yeah, Dan, I agree with that. And also giving the early feedback gives you a sense of what they're feeling, so that if you need to change something up, edit, etc. The other part that I was thinking that may have left my train of thought is, well, number one, I've seen the most effective executives use this, usually in their one-on-ones. They'll feed a nugget or seed an idea, plant that seed. And if I think of the other thing, I'll come back to it. But in the meantime, let's go to the other question. Irina, how do you communicate if you have a good relationship with your direct manager, but not a great relationship with your skip?
Interesting. I would like to understand more about like, what does it mean you don't have a great relationship? Like, is it bad or is it just not strong enough?
This question is from Anonymous, so they might not come on and ask. Let's assume the worst.
Let's assume the worst, where they don't. Interesting. I wonder where does it stem from, right? Is it because sometimes what can happen is you would just suffer from your manager not having a good relationship with their manager. So, every time people come to me with problems, I'm trying to understand whether the problem can be solved or not. Like, is it above our level, or is it something we can take action on? Because sometimes there might be dynamics where teams don't get opportunity, and that's just because it's the manager did something where and the whole team is suffering. So I would try to get more information of why that's the case. Because again, you can't really make you can make people like you if, for example, you make them look good, like you work on things that are actually impactful. And with skip levels, it's the same. Like your output leads to success for the team, which leads to success for the manager, success for the skip level, and so on and so forth. So to troubleshoot where it breaks in this link, you have to verify, are we succeeding as a team? Did my manager do something? Is there a way to communicate my own impact in these skip level meetings? And also always err on the questions asking side. Like, try to understand or make the skip level feel heard and seen in the one-on-ones. And also ask, that's the other thing about trust, is how can we strengthen our trust? What could I do to strengthen our trust? And just involve them, ask them, see what they react. Questions, just investigate.
the good part of this question was this person said they have a good relationship with their manager. So
Yeah, I'm talking
use your
about the
manager.
trust.
Oh,
Yeah. No, I'm talking about the skip levels meetings.
Yes. But what I'm saying is they could use the manager as the supportive champion for the skip level.
That's in the less unhappy case, right? Because the more unhappy cases, it's not your fault, it's the manager's fault. So now you have to sort of compensate for that broken link and create your own strong link to the skip level. That's based on who you are and your output as an individual and decoupled from that team and your manager. And it is possible. It is possible.
Going back to Daniel's question, Daniel, I remember what I was going to build on. Irina brought up deferring to experts before. When you prep a senior executive, if you know there's an expert on their team that they rely on for XYZ, make sure to ally with that expert first. Because what you don't want is to go into that prep with a senior leader and they say, did you talk to XYZ? Or what's XYZ's POV? And you say, I didn't talk to that person. So go in prepared with that. But that's what I wanted to remember. We're over time. No worries. Is there any last questions before we let Irina go? Doesn't seem like it. Okay. I pasted in the chat where you could find Irina. There are 3 main channels: Irina's newsletter, Irina's Maven course, and then you can follow Irina on LinkedIn. Irina puts out great content. I find it very insightful. Irina, I need to do more to reply because I have I like to build on a lot of your thoughts because it makes me think deeper. Before we let you go, any closing words for this group, Irina?
My overall life mission is to help engineers and managers become true leaders. Influence is a part of it. And if you've ever seen influence as an elusive art, in my course, we show that it's not. It's a repeatable process. So as you mentioned, my newsletter, or if you want to find out more about my coaching offering, you can also email me at thecaringtechie@gmail.com. That's it.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I will send an email with all these links afterwards through the Luma event. But Irina, thank you for your time and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you.
Okay, bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.